This is the story of two souls who were, unfortunately, pushed around by fate. Two friends that only wanted to live their lives and be loved, yet, due to unfortunate circumstances and actions, the consequences led them to a tragic end. Their names were Selena and Himiko, Himi for short. Selena and Himi met when they were in middle school. Selena had just transferred, and there were rumors of her being a troubled child prone to violence and lashing out, so no one really wanted to get close to her. No one except Himi, who had decided to try and get to know her, and soon enough they became best friends. In fact, Himi was Selena's first and only friend, and she cherished her more than anything, willing to get into fights and in trouble to protect her. Selena would lose her temper if someone messed with her and her friend, but Himi would always manage to calm her down and reassure her that she was okay. They stayed close all throughout their school years, practically glued to one another. They were never too far from one another, and when they could, Himi would invite Selena over to her house to hang out, and Himi's parents were always happy to have the girls over. They didn't really have other friends, but it didn't really matter. They had each other, and that was more than enough. Himiko was an only child with loving and caring parents, a gentle and caring mother, and a protective and funny father. They were very close to each other, and they loved each other very much. They were very happy when they met their daughter's new friend, and were always happy to see them play together, although they were a little worried for Selena. They knew that her temper and tendency to lash out couldn't have simply come out of nowhere, and they noticed the unusual bruises that would appear on her. However, Selena would always play it off, explaining that she fell down the stairs or got into a fight, and other excuses of the sort. All of these explanations made sense and were true to an extent based on what they knew of her, but there was always a nagging feeling in their minds that something else was at play. However, Himi's parents didn't want to pry too much, feeling as it was none of their business, but they were keeping an eye open just in case. Himi and Selena looked happy, and that's what mattered the most. However, Himi's parents were right to be worried, because if Himi had a loving and caring family, the same could not be said for Selena. In truth, Selena's home situation was a living hell, her only time of peace being when she was with Himi and her family. Selena lived alone with her father. Her mother was out of the picture. She had left her daughter when she was 6 years old. At the time, Selena hadn't understood why and kept waiting and hoping for her mother to come home, until she eventually accepted that her mother would never come back. She had abandoned her. And as she grew, she started to understand that perhaps her mother left her because she looked like him, her father, the source of all her fear and pain. Selena's father was unstable. He was an alcoholic and would physically and emotionally abuse her ever since she was a child. He claimed that he loved her more than anything, that he didn't want to hurt her, but she made him do it. And he kept blaming Selena for his actions. Every day after school, Selena was dreading coming back home. Every day she was hurt. Every day she apologized for making her father do this, as if it was her fault that her father was hurting her. Rinse and repeat. Selena didn't want to let anyone know. She didn't want to worry Himi and her family, or worse, risk their safety. She didn't want her father to hurt them, so she kept silent. The more years went by, the more the abuse continued and worsened, alongside Selena's temper. The second that she felt that her or Himi were in danger, she would lash out and attack. She got in trouble more often, and people started to fear her due to her violent tendencies. Himi was the only one who stayed by her side regardless. The only one who could calm her down, who saw the kind and loving friend she had always known underneath it all. Himiko was worried for her, but there wasn't much she could do. She had no idea of the full extent of what Selena was going through. All she could do was be there for her friend. And so the abuse continued behind closed doors until Selena couldn't take it anymore, and things went south. She had hit her father right in the face when he got too close to her. She hadn't meant to. She was just so afraid. She didn't want to be hurt again. She had been beaten and abused for so long. He had robbed her of her entire childhood, and she just couldn't handle it any longer. She needed to fight back. But all she felt afterwards was instant regret and pure, utter fear upon realizing what she had done and seeing the look on her father's face. Her father had gone completely ballistic at the fact she had hit him, and a fight broke out as Selena desperately tried to defend herself against her father, who seemed to actually want to kill her this time. A passerby heard the screams and commotion and immediately called the police. Thankfully, Selena's father was arrested before he could harm her even further. She was taken to the hospital to treat her injuries and then was placed in foster care until she could find her own place. Things seemed to get a little better after that. Her father was gone and Himi was still in her life, and that was enough for her. It's all she needed. Himi never learned the full truth of what happened, and Selena figured that it was better this way. She didn't want her to worry. And so their lives continued as they started college together, things seemingly normal on the surface. However, it was not the case, and it was killing Himi inside. You see, shortly after college started, Himi noticed something amiss on her way home, and found herself stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time. She witnessed a drug dealing in an alley and was unfortunately caught by the men. They could have killed her right then and there, but instead they threatened her and forced Himi to essentially become their errand girl, or else she and her family would die. Himi was forced to do this gang's bidding, steal for them, participate in drug dealings, etc., all against her will, and she could not tell anyone about it. She couldn't tell her family, and she couldn't tell Selena about what was going on and possibly risk their safety, so she kept quiet and tried to pretend everything was fine. Selena could tell that something was bothering her friend, but Himi would always tell her that it's nothing and that she's fine. Selena didn't want to bother her further, but she was still worried, knowing something was wrong. Not being able to tell her best friend was killing Himi inside, but she was too scared to tell the truth. And so this continued on for a few more years, with Himi keeping the secret of what she was doing against her will. Until eventually, it all came to a head and took a turn for the worst. Selena knew something was wrong. Out of respect for her friend's wishes, she didn't pry further when Himi would say that she was fine, but she knew it was wrong, and she didn't want to let Himi suffer any longer. If someone was hurting the person she cared for the most, she was going to make them pay. And so she followed Himi and learned the truth about Himi's situation with the gangsters. Selena was not happy and grabbed Himi to make her hide behind her, to protect her, yelling at the gangsters to leave Himi alone. They laughed at that and were taunting Himi, insulting her for not being able to keep her little mouth shut, and looks like we need to silence you for good now. Selena saw red. She'd always been prone to violence when it came to protect Himi, but this time it was stronger than it ever had been. A brutal fight broke out, and Selena managed to steal one of the gangsters' knives and got the upper hand. She was so enraged, completely blinded by it, that she ended up killing every single gang member that were present that night. Himi was completely horrified, never having seen Selena lose control this way. She tried to stop her and calm her down like she always had done before, but this time Selena was too blinded by her rage. She was so consumed by it that she mistook Himi for another gang member and stabbed her. This snapped Selena back to reality. as the realization of what she had done came crashing down on her shoulders. She shrieked and cried, holding onto Himi as she kept apologizing over and over as Himi died in her arms. The last thing Himi saw was the anguish, the pain, and the tears streaming down Selena's face before darkness consumed her. Things felt like a blur to Selena afterwards. One moment she was holding on Himi's body, and the next she was running away into the forest, trying to escape the cops. She couldn't stop her tears, the image of Himi dying in her arms playing over and over in her head, not paying attention to her surroundings, not seeing the cliff coming closer, as Selena lost her balance and tripped, falling down the cliff, down to her death. Selena wasn't surprised to wake up in hell. She felt so empty, the guilt eating her up inside. She never meant for things to go so wrong, and she couldn't forgive herself for what she had done to her one and only friend. She had lost everything, and it was her fault. She wandered aimlessly, and it wasn't long until she was found by the radio demon himself, Alistair. Selena could tell he was dangerous, but she knew she couldn't live alone on her own. She was so tired of everything. And well, since she had lost everything already, she had nothing left to lose. And so she willingly made a deal with Alistair. She asked for a place to live, for safety and his protection, as well as a chance at getting back to the gangsters that ruined Himiko's life. They had to have fallen in hell too, after all. In exchange, Alistair asked for her soul, and thus have her work for him and obey him. A lot would probably call her crazy for willingly making such a deal, and perhaps she was. But if this truly was a mistake, at least it was hers alone to make. And whatever the consequences her decision would bring, she decided she would face them head on and try to see the good in her situation. And surprisingly, it wasn't so bad. While it was nerve-wracking at first, working for Alistair wasn't as bad as she thought. She even came to enjoy his presence and personality, when he wasn't angry, that is. She had a safe place to live, finally, after so long of not feeling safe in her own home. It came at the cost of her soul, but to Selena, it was worth it. The pain of losing Himi was still hard on her heart, but she managed to find some happiness despite her situation. She embraced it, embraced her new life, her new start, even if the path was stained by blood. She discarded her old name and embraced her new self, Scarlet, the radio demon's new assistant, or pet, as some would call her. And thus, 8 long years went by slowly. While things got better for Scarlet during those 8 years, the same could not be said for Himi. For yes, she too had woken up in hell, all alone, the painful memories still lingering in her mind. She didn't resent what Scarlet did to her, mind you. If anything, she was worried. Of course, she was completely heartbroken at the notion of being in hell and never be able to see her family again. But she knew her friend hadn't meant to kill her. But now, she was in hell, all alone, with no more protection. And she had to do whatever it took to survive. It wasn't easy. Anytime she found a new place to live, she eventually had to leave it because a fight would break out, or a fire, or any other incidents that would force her out. She could never find a safe living space for very long. She picked up some jobs here and then, oftentimes those jobs being stealing or dealing drugs again like before, or even being paid to take the fall for another sinner's crimes. During those years, Himi died 3 different times, and each time just brought more pain and trauma upon her. It was as if things kept getting worse and worse. Honestly, the fact that she had managed to escape each extermination every time by hiding and be as still and silent as possible was a miracle in her eyes. But it was the only miracle granted for her. At her lowest point, she had even considered working for Valentino of all people. But she didn't let herself do so. She refused to give up. She never, wanted to be stuck on someone's leash ever again. And so she held on, trying to survive on her own for those 8 long years. Eventually, Himi heard about the Hazbin Hotel. She had hesitated at first, unsure if redemption was even worth it at this point, but ultimately decided to give it a try, thinking that it couldn't be worse than what she had to deal with so far. Besides, she really needed a new place to live. She was surprised at the warm welcome, but then stopped in her tracks as she saw a familiar face, while looking back at her with equal shock as Himi uttered her old name. When Scarlett realized that the sinner in front of her really was Himi, her dear friend, she ran towards her and pulled her into a hug, crying her eyes out, apologizing over and over. Himi couldn't stop her tears either as she hugged back tightly, reassuring Scarlett that she forgave her, that she had never resented her, ever. They cried for a while, the tears turning into happy ones as they finally were reunited. Himi wasn't happy to learn that Scarlett has sold her soul, but she wasn't mad at her for doing so. She understood why Scarlett did it. If anything, she was solely mad at Alistair for taking advantage of her friend's lowest point. At least that's how Himi saw it. But at the very least, they were together again, and that's what mattered the most. It was a new start, a new beginning for their afterlife. And they vowed to never let the world bring them apart ever again. They would fight until the very end to protect each other and those they care for. This was a promise they intended to keep until their last breath.